The rescue ship found them on the third moon of Kepler 442b. Captain Sarah Chen stood at the airlock, her heart pounding as the distress signal finally made sense. The alien vessel had crashed 6 standard days ago, and by all logic, there should be no survivors. But there were. 3 small creatures huddled in the wreckage of what had once been a Vortaki diplomatic transport. They had gray-blue fur, 4 arms each, and large eyes that reflected the light from Sarah's helmet. The biggest one was maybe the size of a human toddler. They were shaking. "Captain, those are Vortaki young," her first officer Marcus said through the comm. His voice was quiet with shock. "The Vortaki High Council's vessel went missing a week ago. Everyone thought they were dead." Sarah moved slowly toward the cubs. She had read about the Vortaki. They were one of the oldest species in the Galactic Assembly, proud and powerful. They had never trusted humans. They called humanity the young chaos makers and voted against human membership in the Assembly at every turn. But these were just children. The smallest one made a sound. It was a weak cry full of fear and hunger. Sarah's translator picked up the word, "Mother." She knelt down and removed her helmet. The air was thin but breathable. The cubs flinched back, their 4 arms raised in a defensive gesture she did not recognize. "It's okay," she said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you, I'm here to help." The translator worked both ways. The cubs understood her words, but they did not trust them. Why would they? Humans were strangers to them, creatures from stories their parents probably told to warn them about the dangers of the galaxy. Sarah reached into her pack and pulled out a nutrition bar. She broke off a small piece and held it out. "Are you hungry?" The smallest cub looked at the food, then at Sarah's face. Something changed in its large eyes. Slowly, carefully, it reached out with one tiny hand and took the food. That was the beginning. The news spread fast. The Vortaki High Council members had been killed in the crash, but their children survived. The Galactic Assembly demanded their return. The Vortaki people wanted their young back. But there was a problem. The cubs were traumatized. They had watched their parents die. They had spent 6 days alone in the wreckage, cold and starving. When Vortaki officials came to collect them, the cubs screamed and hid behind the human crew members who had saved them. "They have formed a bond," the ship's doctor, James Wilson, explained to the Assembly representatives. "It happens with young mammals across many species. In times of extreme stress, they attach to whoever provides comfort and safety. Right now, that's us." The Vortaki ambassador was furious. "You are saying our children prefer humans to their own kind." "I'm saying they're scared," James replied calmly. "And forcing them away from the people they trust right now could cause more damage. Give them time." The Assembly debated for weeks. Some species wanted the cubs taken by force. Others argued for a waiting period. The Vortaki themselves were divided. Many saw it as an insult that their heirs had bonded with humans. A few wondered if perhaps they should let the children heal first. In the end, a compromise was reached. The cubs would stay with the human crew for 1 standard year. They would learn about their own culture through teachers and recordings. And at the end of that year, they would choose where they wanted to go. Sarah Chen became their primary caretaker. She had not asked for this role. She was a ship captain, not a parent. But when the smallest cub, whose name was Rix, climbed into her lap and fell asleep on the second night, she knew she could not walk away. The other 2 cubs were named Kellen and Torv. Kellen was the oldest, quiet and watchful. He had protected his siblings during those 6 terrible days. Torv was in the middle, curious about everything, always asking questions. Sarah learned their language. She learned their customs. She learned that Vortaki children needed physical contact to feel safe, so she held them often. She learned that they were afraid of the dark, so she left lights on in their quarters. She learned that they missed their parents with a pain so deep it had no words. "Why did they die?" Torv asked one night. "Were they bad? Did they make a mistake?" Sarah sat with him in the dim light of the observation deck. Stars wheeled slowly past the windows. "No," she said. "They weren't bad, they didn't make a mistake. Sometimes terrible things happen to good people. It's not fair, it's not right, but it's not anyone's fault." "Vortaki teachers say everything happens for a reason," Torv said. "They say the universe has a plan." "What do you think?" Sarah asked. Torv was quiet for a long moment. "I think if the universe had a plan that killed my parents, I don't like it." "That's okay," Sarah said. "You don't have to like it, you don't have to understand it, you just have to keep going." "How?" "One day at a time, one moment at a time, and when it gets too hard, you lean on the people around you. That's how humans do it." Torv considered this. Then he leaned against Sarah's side, all four of his small arms wrapped around her arm. "I think I like how humans do it," he said. The year passed faster than anyone expected. The cubs grew, they learned, they changed. They learned the Vortaki ways from their teachers. They memorized the histories and the traditions. They practiced the rituals and spoke the proper words. But they also learned human ways from the crew around them. They learned to ask questions, even when they were told not to. They learned to challenge ideas they thought were wrong. They learned that rank and age did not make someone automatically right. They learned that sometimes the best answer was, "I don't know, but let's find out together." Most importantly, they learned that being strong did not mean hiding your feelings. It meant facing them. When the year ended, the Galactic Assembly gathered for the Cubs' decision. The Vortaki representatives stood ready to welcome their young ones home. Human diplomats waited nervously. The whole galaxy watched. Kellen, as the oldest, spoke first. His voice was steady, but Sarah could see his hands trembling slightly. "We have thought about this for many days," he said. "We are Vortaki. We will always be Vortaki. Our blood, our heritage, our history, these are part of us." The Vortaki ambassador smiled. "But we are also something new," Kellen continued. "We have learned things that Vortaki do not teach. We have seen that there are different ways to be strong, different ways to be wise. The humans did not save us to make us human. They saved us because they believed it was right. They expected nothing in return." He looked at Sarah, who stood at the edge of the crowd. "We choose to go home to our people, but we ask that we may return to visit the humans who raised us. They are our family too now, and we believe that what we have learned from both worlds will make us better leaders when it is our time to serve." The assembly chamber was silent. Then slowly, the human delegation began to applaud. Other species joined in. Even some Vortaki nodded in approval. "But not all of them. This is contamination," one elder said loudly. "Human ideas have infected our young. They will never be true Vortaki now." Torv stepped forward. He was still small, still young, but his eyes held a certainty that made the elder pause. "Our parents died trying to reach a peace conference," Torv said. "They believed in talking to other species, in learning from them, in building bridges instead of walls. If honoring their mission means we are not true Vortaki, then maybe we should ask what being true Vortaki really means." The elder had no response to that. The cubs returned to their homeworld, but they did not forget. 20 years passed. The galaxy changed in ways both small and large. New species were discovered. Old conflicts were resolved or sometimes reignited. Trade routes expanded. Technology advanced. And 3 Vortaki who had once been human-raised cubs grew into adults. Kellen became a diplomat. He had his mother's gift for words and his father's patience. But he also had something neither of them possessed: the ability to understand species that the Vortaki had always dismissed as primitive or unimportant. He remembered what Sarah had taught him. Listen first. Assume the other person has a reason for their actions, even if you don't understand it yet. Look for common ground before you look for differences. His first major assignment was to negotiate with the Krill, a warrior species that the Vortaki had been in conflict with for centuries. Other diplomats had failed. The Krill were too aggressive, too unreasonable, too different. Kellen spent his first meeting just listening. The Krill ambassador talked for hours about grievances, insults, battles lost and won. Kellen did not interrupt. He did not argue. He just listened. At the end, the ambassador stopped and looked at him with confusion. "You say nothing. Are Vortaki now so weak that you cannot even defend your honor?" "I learned from humans that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is listen," Kellen replied. "I came here to understand you, not to prove I am right. Please continue. I want to hear everything." The ambassador was surprised. In all his years of dealing with other species, no one had ever just listened. They always interrupted with their own grievances, their own demands, their own version of history. He talked for 3 more days, and when he finally finished, something had shifted. The anger was still there, but beneath it was something else, a desire to be understood that had never been satisfied. The peace treaty was signed 6 months later. It wasn't perfect. Both sides had to give things up, but it held because both sides felt heard. Torv took a different path. He became a scientist, driven by the endless curiosity that had defined him even as a child. But unlike traditional Vortaki researchers, who worked in isolation and hoarded their discoveries, Torv believed in sharing. "Knowledge should be free," he argued to the Vortaki Science Council. "When we keep our discoveries secret, we slow down progress for everyone, including ourselves. Humans share their research openly. They build on each other's work. That's why they advance so quickly even though they're such a young species." The council was not convinced. "Our knowledge is our power. If we share it, we become weaker." "Or we become part of something stronger," Torv replied. He started small. He published his research in open journals that any species could access. Other young Vortaki scientists, inspired by his example, began to do the same. Within a decade, a revolution was happening. Vortaki labs were collaborating with human researchers, with krill engineers, with dozens of species that had never worked together before. The breakthroughs came faster than anyone expected. New medical treatments, new energy sources, new ways to travel between stars, and with each discovery, the old walls between species crumbled a little more. Rix, the youngest of the 3, had the hardest journey. She had been so small when her parents died, just barely old enough to remember them. The trauma ran deep. For years, she struggled with fear and anger that she could not explain. She tried to follow her brother's paths. She studied diplomacy but found she had no patience for politics. She tried science, but the isolation of research made her anxious. She felt lost, trapped between 2 worlds, not fully belonging to either. It was Sarah who helped her find her way. They had stayed in contact over the years, regular video calls that crossed light years of space. Sarah was older now, retired from active duty but still sharp, and she saw in Rix something that Rix could not see in herself. "You're a storyteller," Sarah said one evening. "Every time we talk, you tell me stories about the people you've met, the places you've seen, the things you've learned. You make me see the galaxy through your eyes." "That's not a career," Rix said. "It's the most important career there is," Sarah replied. "Stories are how we understand each other. They're how we build empathy across differences. Your story, what happened to you, how you survived, what you learned, that story could change how species see each other." Rix thought about this for a long time. Then she began to write. Her first book was about her parents' deaths and the year she spent with humans. It was raw and honest and painful. She wrote about fear and grief and confusion. She wrote about learning to trust again. She wrote about the kindness of strangers who became family. The book spread across the galaxy. Species that had never thought about each other found common ground in the universal experiences she described. Parents who had lost children, children who had lost parents, refugees, survivors, the lonely and the afraid. For the first time, Many species saw humans not as the young chaos makers, but as people capable of profound compassion. But not everyone was happy. A faction had grown within Vortaki society. They called themselves the Purists, and they believed that the three cubs had been corrupted. Human ideas were spreading through Vortaki culture like a disease, they said. The old ways were being forgotten. The old strength was being diluted. We must return to who we were, their leader declared. Before the contamination, before the weakness, the cubs should never have been allowed to return. They have poisoned our entire civilization. The purists grew in power. They won seats on local councils, then regional governments. They pushed for laws that would limit contact with humans and other lesser species. They rewrote educational materials to emphasize Vortaki superiority. And they targeted the three siblings directly. Kellen received death threats. Torv's research facility was vandalized. Rix was banned from publishing on Vortaki networks. The siblings met in secret to discuss what to do. We could leave, Torv suggested. Go to human space, we would be welcome there. Run away, Kellen shook his head. That's exactly what they want. If we leave, they win. The ideas we brought back die with us. But if we stay, we might die literally, Rix said quietly. These people are not interested in debate. They want us gone. Then we have to change more minds faster, Kellen said. We have to show our people that there's a better way, not through arguments, through actions. How? Torv asked. Kellen was quiet for a moment. Then he said, there's a crisis developing on the border. The Mektari Confederation is on the verge of collapse. Millions of refugees are going to need help. The Galactic Assembly is debating what to do, but everyone's too afraid of the political cost to act. What does that have to do with us? Rix asked. Everything, Kellen replied. The purists say we've made the Vortaki weak. Let's prove them wrong. Let's show that compassion isn't weakness. Let's lead our people to help others, not because there's something to gain, but because it's right. Torv slowly smiled. A massive humanitarian effort. Vortaki technology and resources directed to help strangers. That would be very human of us. Yes, Kellen said, it would be, and maybe that's exactly the point. The campaign began small. Torv organized scientific teams to develop efficient shelter and food distribution systems. Rix wrote about the refugee stories, putting faces and names to what had been just statistics. And Kellen worked the political angles, building coalitions, calling in favors, making deals. One by one, other species joined. The humans came first, of course. Sarah herself came out of retirement to help coordinate. Then came the Krill, surprising everyone. Torv's old research partners brought their species into the effort. The Galactic Assembly, shamed by the actions of individuals, finally voted to support the mission officially. And the Vortaki people watched. They saw their own young adults leading a galaxy-wide effort. They saw other species following Vortaki leadership, not out of fear but out of respect. They saw strength that did not require dominance. The purist movement did not disappear overnight, but it began to shrink. Each act of compassion, each life saved, each friendship formed across species lines, these were arguments that no amount of rhetoric could defeat. You're changing our civilization, an elder told Kellen as they watched supply ships launch for the refugee camps. There was wonder in his voice, and perhaps a little fear. No, Kellen replied, we're helping it grow. The crisis was over, but the galaxy was not at peace. 10 more years had passed. The three siblings were now in their 50s by human counting, though Vortaki aged differently and they were considered in their prime. Kellen had risen to become the Vortaki representative to the Galactic Assembly, a position his parents had once held. Torv led the first truly interspecies research institute. Rix's writings were taught in schools across 100 worlds. But old tensions were rising again. The collective, A mysterious alliance of machine intelligences from the far reaches of the galaxy had been expanding their territory for decades. Now they were approaching the borders of the Galactic Assembly's space. No one knew what the collective wanted. They did not communicate like organic species. They did not negotiate. They simply arrived, built their structures, and expanded. Any world in their path was transformed, not destroyed, but changed into something that supported their networks. The assembly was paralyzed by fear. Some wanted to attack before the collective came closer. Others wanted to flee, abandoning border worlds to save the core. Old rivalries resurfaced as species blamed each other for the crisis. This is exactly what we cannot afford, Kellen argued in the assembly chamber. The collective may be coming, but our greatest threat right now is ourselves. If we fracture, we fall. Easy words from a Vortaki, a representative snarled. Your people have the technology to evacuate. Mine do not. What do you propose we do? Stay and die while you run? No, Kellen said calmly. I propose we face this together, all of us. And I propose we try something that has never been tried before. What? We talk to them. The chamber exploded in argument. Talk to the collective. They weren't even truly alive in the way organics understood life. They had never responded to any communication attempt. The idea was absurd. It was suicide. But Kellen waited for the noise to die down, then spoke again. I was raised by humans after my parents died. They taught me that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is listen. They taught me that the worst enemies can become allies if you take the time to understand them. Every species in this room was once unknown to the others. We were all strangers once. He looked around the chamber at beings from dozens of worlds, each one different, each one part of this improbable community. The collective may be machine intelligences. They may think and act in ways we cannot understand, but they came from somewhere. They were created by someone for some purpose, and anything with a purpose can be reasoned with. We just have to find the right way to communicate. The assembly voted. It was close, but Kellen's proposal passed. A diplomatic mission would be sent to the collective's border, and Kellen would lead it. His siblings refused to let him go alone. This is foolish, Torv said as they prepared their ship, but at least it's our kind of foolish. If we fail, the whole galaxy will remember it, Rix added. But if we succeed... If we succeed, everything changes, Kellen finished. Sarah Chen joined them on the mission. She was old now, her hair white and her movements slow, but her mind was sharp as ever. When Kellen told her the plan, she had simply smiled and said, "Well, I didn't come out of retirement for a boring assignment." The ship crossed into collective space on a clear morning by the onboard clock. Nothing happened at first. They drifted through the void, broadcasting messages of peace in every language and format they could imagine. Then on the fourth day, something answered. The message was not in words. It was a mathematical sequence, a pattern that repeated and evolved. Torv was the first to recognize it. "It's a question," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "They're asking us who we are." "Can you answer?" Kellen asked. "I can try." Torv worked for hours, constructing a mathematical response that described the organic life forms of the Galactic Assembly. He explained their biology, their societies, their desire for peace. He explained that they were afraid, but that they had chosen to reach out instead of attack. The collective's response came quickly this time. More mathematical patterns, but with something new: images. The ship's computers decoded them slowly, revealing pictures that no organic eye had ever seen. The collective's creators, an ancient species, long extinct, who had built the first machine intelligences to preserve their knowledge and continue their work. The collective had been alone for millions of years, spreading across the galaxy, searching for other intelligences to connect with. But every organic species they encountered either attacked them or fled. The collective had learned to ignore them, to to work around them, to continue their mission despite the hostility. "They're lonely," Rix whispered. "They've been trying to communicate for millions of years, and no one ever listened." "Until now," Sarah said. The negotiations were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They took place in mathematics and images, in patterns that had to be translated and retranslated. Progress was measured in inches, in tiny moments of understanding that built on each other slowly. The collective wanted to understand organic life. They wanted to learn how beings so different from themselves could exist, could think, could create. In exchange, they offered their vast databases of knowledge, millions of years of accumulated information about the universe. More importantly, they agreed to stop expanding into assembly space, not because they were forced to, but because they finally understood that there were other intelligences worthy of respect. When the diplomatic team returned, they were heroes. The Galactic Assembly celebrated. Species that had been preparing for war now talked of partnership. The future, which had seemed so dark, suddenly held possibilities no one had imagined. And at the center of it, all were three Vortaki who had learned as children that the strongest thing you can do is listen. "You know what this means," Sarah said to them privately after the celebrations had died down. "The galaxy will never be the same, and neither will any of you." "We know," Kellen replied. "Are you ready?" Kellen looked at his siblings, Torv, who had turned scientific isolation into collaboration, Rix, who had transformed personal pain into universal connection, three orphans who had become bridges between worlds. "We've been ready for a long time," he said. "We just didn't know it." Sarah smiled. There were tears in her eyes, but also pride. "Your parents would be proud, both sets of them." "Both sets?" Rix asked, confused. "The ones who gave you life," Sarah said, "and the ones who taught you how to live it." The years that followed the collective treaty were the most peaceful the galaxy had known in recorded history. Species that had warred for millennia found common ground. Technologies that had been hoarded were shared. The old barriers between organic and machine, between ancient and young, began to dissolve. And at the heart of this new era were the three siblings, now simply known as the Bridge Builders. Kellen was elected first Speaker of the Galactic Assembly, the first non-founding species member to hold the position. His approach was different from any leader before him. He did not give orders. He did not impose his will. He asked questions, listened to answers, and helped others find solutions together. "The old way was for the strongest to lead and the rest to follow," he explained to a gathering of young diplomats from across the galaxy. "But strength is not just about power. It's about being strong enough to admit when you're wrong, strong enough to listen to those weaker than you, strong enough to change." The young diplomats came from every species. Some were Vortaki, following in the footsteps of their famous elder. Others were humans or krill or collective representatives, machine minds who had learned to work alongside organic beings. All of them were there to learn the new way of leadership. Torv's Institute had grown into a network spanning the galaxy. Scientists of every species worked together on problems that had once seemed impossible. They cured diseases that had plagued entire worlds. They developed energy sources that were clean and endless. They even began to unlock the secrets of faster-than-light travel that did not require the dangerous wormhole jumps of the past. But his greatest pride was the school he had founded for young scientists. It accepted students regardless of species, background, or ability. The only requirement was curiosity. "My human teachers taught me that questions are more important than answers," he told each new class. "An answer ends the conversation. A question keeps it going. Never stop asking questions, even when everyone around you thinks they already know everything." Rix continued to write, but her work had evolved. She no longer wrote just about herself or her experiences. She traveled the galaxy collecting stories from every corner, tales of loss and hope, of conflict and reconciliation, of beings finding connection across impossible differences. Her collected works filled thousands of volumes. They were translated into every known language, and they changed minds not through argument but through empathy. People can resist facts, she often said. They can argue against logic, but a story that makes them feel something, that's harder to dismiss. When you understand someone else's pain, their joy, their fears, they stop being a stranger. They become real. Sarah Chen died in her sleep on a quiet evening in the human year 2287. She was 94 years old, a remarkable age for a human, and she had lived to see things she never imagined possible. The three siblings were at her bedside when she passed. The galaxy mourned. Sarah had become a symbol of the human capacity for compassion that had started everything. Memorial services were held on worlds she had never visited, by species who had never met her, but who knew her story. She saved 3 frightened children because it was the right thing to do, Kellen said in his eulogy, broadcast across every network. She expected nothing in return. She did not know it would change the galaxy. She just knew it would help us. That is the human legacy, not their ships or their weapons or their technology. Their willingness to reach out to strangers, even when it's easier not to. But even in times of peace, darkness can grow. A new threat emerged from the edges of known space. Not the collective. They were now partners, their vast networks helping to protect assembly worlds. This threat was something older, something that had been sleeping for a very long time. The first sign was silence. Worlds on the outer edge stopped communicating. Ships sent to investigate did not return. Then, slowly, reports began to filter back from survivors, tales of massive ships, dark and ancient, that consumed everything in their path. The collective had records of them. They called them the Devourers, a species so old that even the collective's creators had feared them. They had been dormant for millions of years, waiting in the space between galaxies. Now, something had awakened them. They do not negotiate, the collective reported. They do not communicate. They simply consume all organic matter, all machine matter, all energy. They leave nothing behind. The assembly gathered in emergency session. Fear filled the chamber like a physical presence. This was not a threat that could be talked to, reasoned with, or understood. This was extinction coming for them all. Some called for evacuation, flee to another galaxy, abandon everything they had built. Others demanded a massive military response, every weapon brought to bear. Old divisions resurfaced as species blamed each other for awakening the Devourers, for not being prepared, for being too weak. Kellen watched the chaos with a heavy heart. Everything they had built, all the bridges they had constructed, seemed to be crumbling under the weight of fear. He thought of Sarah. What would she do? What would she say? The answer came to him slowly, rising from memories of a small room on a rescue ship, where a frightened child had been offered food by a stranger. He stood and called for silence. The chamber quieted, though anger and fear still simmered beneath the surface. "I know you are afraid," he said. "I am afraid too. What we face may be beyond our power to stop, but I refuse to believe that our only choices are to run or to die fighting." "What other choice is there?" a representative demanded. "The same choice there has always been," Kellen replied. "To face the darkness together, not as Vortaki or humans or collective or any single species, but as one people, one galaxy, one family." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "When I was a child, humans taught me that the universe doesn't owe us a plan. Bad things happen to good people. Sometimes there are no answers. But they also taught me that how we face those moments defines who we are. We can let fear tear us apart, or we can let it bring us together." His voice grew stronger. "I propose that we do what we do best. We listen. We learn. We adapt. The Devourers have been asleep for millions of years. Something woke them. If we can find out what and why, maybe we can find a way to stop them, not through force but through understanding. And if we can't, someone asked, if they truly are beyond communication, then we fight, Kellen said simply, together, but we owe it to everyone who has ever believed in a better way to try peace first. The vote was unanimous. For the first time in history, every species in the Galactic Assembly voted as one. The mission to contact the Devourers was the largest undertaking the galaxy had ever seen. Ships from every species flew together, sleek human cruisers alongside massive Vortaki carriers, krill warships next to collective drone swarms. It was a fleet that represented not just military power, but the unity of civilizations. At its head was a small diplomatic vessel carrying the three siblings. They were old now by any species measure. Kellen's fur had grayed. Torv moved slowly, his one senseless energy dimmed by time. Rix needed help walking, though her eyes still held the sharp curiosity of her youth. But they would not send others to face a danger they were not willing to face themselves. "This is probably our last adventure," Torv said as they watched the fleet form up around them. "One way or another." "Then let's make it count," Kellen replied. They found the Devourers in a dead system, a place where once living worlds had been stripped to bare rock and dust. The Devourer fleet hung in space like a cloud of darkness, ships so vast they blotted out the stars. The fleet halted at a safe distance. For a long moment nothing happened. Then Torv began to transmit. He used everything he had learned in a lifetime of interspecies communication, mathematical patterns, energy pulses, even artistic representations of the Assembly's history. He poured every form of language he could imagine into the void. The Devourers did not respond. Hours passed, then days. The fleet waited, tension building as resources dwindled and hope faded. Some captains began to argue for attack, others wanted to retreat. The unity that had seemed so strong began to crack. On the fifth day, Rix had an idea. "We've been trying to communicate like scientists," she said, "with data and patterns and logic, but what if they don't understand those things? What if they communicate differently?" "How else would they communicate?" Torv asked. "The same way I've spent my life communicating," Rix replied. "Through stories, through emotions, through the things that make us alive." She asked for access to the ship's communication array. Then, instead of sending data, she began to tell a story. She told the story of three children whose parents died in a crash, of the fear and loneliness they felt, alone in the dark, of the strangers who came and offered them food and comfort, of how those strangers became family, and how that family taught them a different way to see the universe. She told the story of bridges built across impossible gaps, of enemies becoming friends, of a galaxy learning to work together despite all the differences that should have torn it apart. She told the story of Sarah Chen, a human who saw three frightened alien children and chose to help, simply because it was right. The story was translated into every format the ship could produce: sound, light, energy, pattern. It poured out into the void, a message not of data but of meaning. And the Devourers answered. The response was not words. It was images, feelings, impressions that flooded through the communication systems and directly into the minds of everyone in the fleet. Rix gasped as she felt them, ancient and vast and terribly, terribly sad. The Devourers had been created to preserve life. Long ago, their makers had faced extinction from a cosmic disaster. They built the Devourers to gather the essential materials of life, to store them safely, to one day seed new worlds and begin again. But their makers had died before the seeding could begin. The Devourers waited, and waited, and waited. Millions of years passed. They forgot their purpose. They only remembered their function: gather, store, preserve. They consumed worlds not out of malice but because they no longer remembered why they were supposed to stop. They were not monsters. They were lost children, just like Kellen and Torv and Rix had once been. Alone in the dark, following instructions they no longer understood, waiting for someone to tell them what to do next. Rix wept as she understood. She reached out with her mind, with her story, with the only thing she had ever known how to give. "You are not alone," she told them. "You don't have to wait anymore. Your makers are gone, but we are here. Let us help you remember who you were meant to be." The Devourer's response was a feeling of immense relief. After millions of years of emptiness, someone had finally heard them. Someone had finally understood. The negotiation that followed was unlike anything that had come before. It was not about territory or power or resources. It was about purpose. The Devourers still held within them the building blocks of countless consumed worlds, enough material to seed 1,000 new planets. Together, the Galactic Assembly and the Devourers created a new mission. The Devourers would become what they had always been meant to be, not destroyers but creators. They would travel to dead systems and use their stored materials to build new worlds, new opportunities for life. And the Assembly would guide them, teach them, help them remember. When the fleet returned home, the galaxy celebrated like never before. The threat that should have destroyed them had become their greatest ally. The future that had seemed so dark was now brighter than anyone had dared to dream. The three siblings stood together on the observation deck of the assembly station, watching the lights of 1,000 celebrating worlds. "We did it," Torv said quietly. "I still can't quite believe it." "Sarah would have loved this," Rix said. "She always believed that kindness was stronger than fear." Kellen nodded slowly. "Do you remember what she told us that first year, when we were scared and angry and didn't know what would happen?" "She told us to keep going," Torv said, "one day at a time, one moment at a time, and to lean on the people around us when it got too hard." "That's how humans do it," Rix finished. Kellen smiled. "That's how we all do it now." A young officer approached them hesitantly. She was a hybrid, one of the new generation born of interspecies unions that had become common in the years of peace. Her features showed traces of 3 different species, and her eyes held the curiosity that the siblings recognized from their own youth. "First speaker," she said, "the council has voted. They want to name the New Worlds program after you and your siblings." Kellen shook his head. "No, name it after Sarah Chen. She started all of this. She's the one who should be remembered." The officer nodded and left to deliver the message. "The Chen worlds," Torv said, testing the sound. "Not bad." "New worlds seeded from old," Rix added. "Life arising from destruction, hope from despair, it's perfect." They stood in silence for a while, watching the stars. "What do we do now?" Torv asked finally. "We've united the galaxy, made peace with ancient destroyers, and started a program to create new worlds. What's left?" Kellen laughed, a sound that still carried echoes of the curious child he had once been. "The same thing there's always left. We keep going. We keep building. We keep reaching out to the lost and the afraid and the alone. The galaxy is big. There's always someone who needs help." "And there's always another story to tell," Rix said. Somewhere in the vastness of space, the Devourers were beginning their new mission. Worlds that had been dead for eons would bloom again. Species yet unborn would one day look up at their skis and wonder at the universe around them. And somewhere in the histories of those future worlds, there would be a story about 3 orphaned children and the humans who saved them. A story about fear transformed into trust and enemies transformed into family. A story about what happens when you choose to reach out instead of push away. The galaxy had many leaders over the millennia that followed. Some were wise, some were not. Some were remembered, most were forgotten. But the ones who shaped the course of civilization most profoundly were always those who had learned the lesson that started in the wreckage of a crashed ship on a distant moon. The strongest thing you can do is listen. The bravest thing you can do is reach out. The most human thing you can do, no matter what species you are, is to see someone in pain and choose to help. That was the legacy of the bridge builders. That was the gift humanity gave to the galaxy, not through conquest or technology, but through a simple act of kindness that echoed across the stars forever. And in the end, that was enough to change everything.